Yeah, I'll tell you kind of my personal experiences and my thoughts so far on electro-combat. But before I start, let me just say thanks to Lothar for setting up this whole weekend and bringing us to Bavaria to enjoy each other's company. Yeah, I think it's going to be a nice time. So here are just some pictures of two models I've prepared so far. This was the first one. The second one, and it's not so obvious in the picture, it's quite a bit bigger actually. I thought that more wing area would help hold the weight better, but it turned out the plane was just not a good plane. So here, this weekend, I only have this one. But there's some new ideas I used here, and I'll explain them in a bit. So before I get really started, I think, well, okay, so we're here this weekend to have fun and talk, and also to share information. And I think also a big point of the weekend is to have a discussion about where we think electro-combat is going, what can electro technology do for us. And I think there'll be many questions which come up, but one overarching theme is sort of how do we think about electro technology? Is it something new or something different? And what I mean is, if we think of it as something different, we would say there's F2D. It's been around a long time. We know how it works. And now, okay, there's electro. It has all kinds of different conditions we have to think about. There's batteries, electronics. So we just start a whole separate class and think about it independently from everything going on in F2D. The opposite extreme would be we think of it as something new. So there's been some evolution in combat. If we go back to the 60s and 70s, there was diesel combat, and then in the 80s, glow took over, and technology really stabilized. Planes haven't changed, engines haven't changed in 20 years. Okay. Small incremental improvements. And maybe the next step is electro technology. We don't know if it's going to be better, but maybe it is, and it's just part of some natural evolution. And this is something we should think about. Which kind of picture do we have in mind? Maybe some of both. But I think it's a theme we should keep in mind. So so for the presentation, there's kind of two sections. The first one, I'll just summarize sort of what I found, and the second part, I'll show in detail some of the ways I found of adapting electro components into F2D models. Maybe just give some ideas. I hope I can see what you guys have done as well this weekend. So the starting point of all of this, my thinking when I started working on electro was I visited Lothar here in Munich about 1.5 years ago, and actually I was impressed. I thought electro would be a lot worse than what I saw. But the one thing that stuck out to me was that the level of current being used was so high. It was something like almost 80 amps. And if you just look, okay, this is the only formulas in the talk, but the heating rate that you get when you apply some current goes like the current squared. So as the current goes up, the heat goes up really fast. And the power that we're getting out of it is a product of voltage times current. So for a particular power, we can reduce the current by increasing the voltage. So I said, instead of using a lower voltage battery, why don't we move to higher voltage? So that's why I started with this 4-cell battery, which is 14.8 volts, and that was the whole starting point for my thinking, and then I thought, okay, let's go from there. And so this is the battery that I've been using. And then for motors, there's plenty of motors you can buy online, very cheaply. So these were the first 3 that I bought, and in January last year. They're all about $15. They come to your door in a couple of weeks. And they have different characteristics, so you can't really see. So this is a kV rating, which tells you how many RPM per volt you get. This one is a very light motor. It's only about 80 grams, but it turns 2200 RPM per volt. So actually, at 14.8 volts, it's turning very fast. This one is 1000 RPM per volt, so it's much slower. It's going to be more something like 14,000 RPM in the air. And this was some kind of intermediate regime. So actually, since then, I bought a cousin of this one, which is the same weight, but it turns even faster. And I tested it a few weeks ago, and it turned 35,000 RPM with the T2 prop from Zorro. So it was very noisy, but it's kind of interesting, not from the point of view of reducing noise, but actually it's just a high-performance motor. It could just be something interesting to play with. Maybe get something better than what a 4 is doing. So then, okay, so actually, yeah. So out of this motor and this one, I managed to get 24.7 seconds for 10 laps, but I couldn't do any better than that. So then I decided I need more power, and then I found this motor, which is the best I've tested so far. It was $18 from Hobby King, and it got 22.4 seconds for 10 laps, just straight out of the box. So that was pretty exciting for me. So that's about motors. Right, so kind of a side note, there's some analysis I've found which is kind of neat. If you just record the sound of a flight, so you just fly some laps, I wrote a little program where you put in this file and it outputs this picture. And what this picture is, so time is running this way, and this is frequency, so it's measuring the frequency of the engine, of the sound coming in as a function of time. And what you see is the frequency goes up and down, just like you're familiar hearing the Doppler shift. It goes, this sound. So each time the frequency goes up and down, that's 1 lap. And so you can just read right here what's the time per lap. And also from the frequency itself, you can get the RPM that is turning in the air. So this one says 22.37, let's say it's 22.4 for 10 laps at 18,500 RPM. So it's kind of convenient. Just record your flight, and afterwards you find out all this information. For props, I took a little bit different route maybe than what other people have been doing. I've been using wood propellers, and there's a few reasons for this. One, wood is very light. We have a weight problem with this stuff. So I compared an APC electric prop to one of my props, and there's a 10-gram difference. So that's actually a pretty big deal. And the second is that when we used to fly fast combat 20 years ago, I had a lot of experience making these props, and these were actually left over from that time. And it turned out that this one, which actually was used in competition in fast combat, is the best propeller I've tested so far on all the electric motors that I've tried. Actually, I've made something slightly better than it since then, but somehow they work pretty well. I think eventually, we need some. It's very time-consuming to make these propellers, but I think once we find the right shape, someone can produce them. Right. So this is something that Lothar mentioned. So for right now, I'm using 2.4 gigahertz transmitter-receiver combo to control the motor. But actually, Alex Prokofiev and I have been working, mostly he's been working, right, on adapting the E shutoff from F2D to run the electric motor. And actually, it functions right now. There's just some software bugs that we're working out. So you get the shutoff and the control of the motor all in one. It's just from the switch on the handle, as we use in F2D to do. And this is all it is. It's this tiny board. It's actually even much lighter than the receiver itself. Right, so how have I been going about this? First, how to mount this electric motor. My idea was just take a set of F2D mounts and cut them off the front, and then make some plate that can adapt the electric motor to the F2D mount. So here's what it looks like on the plane. Just slides right on like normal, and these four screws attached to the motor. So actually you can see you have to put the motor on before you slide it on the plate, otherwise you can't. And it's a little bit of a pain in the ass because there's only one order you can do all these screws in, otherwise it doesn't work. And then for the speed controller, heat is a bit of an issue. So we have one advantage, which is that compared to radio-controlled models, our speed controller is on the outside of the plane. So there's a lot of air flowing past it, which is good. But I wanted to do even better a little bit, and I thought we have this big chunk of metal, which is the mount, sitting there. It's kind of a natural heat sink. So why not try to guide the heat from the speed controller right into the mount? So I made this aluminum flap, which goes under the mount, and the speed controller will sit on top of it. So it goes down in the plane like this, and the speed controller sits on it, and how well it works I don't really know. The idea is that it should transfer the heat into the mount to help keep everything cool. And you've seen this picture already. That's just with everything in place. Right, and so then after playing with this for a long time, and I decided to make a second plane, I had some better ideas actually on how to do it, in particular about mounting the battery. So this will just be a quick couple pictures of how I think is now a cool way to do the battery. So to start, just with the knife, we just made two slots right ahead of the spar. And then, cutting away the covering, just slipped a Velcro strap right through the slot, one through each slot, and then just holds the battery like that. It's really, really clean. It takes only about 15 minutes. Here you can see it is carved into the foam. The speed controller sits down in there, and the wires go right under the spar, so everything's totally out of the airstream. It's really clean. Unfortunately, the plane was crappy, but I think this method is good. I'm going to do it on the next plane. So that's basically my summary. So what I think so far from my experience, so electro-combat models, they're clean. That's kind of nice. No cleanup to do. They can be quieter. As I mentioned, I had this, when I tested at 35,000, it was every bit as loud as a Fora. Actually, I have the recording. You can listen to it in a minute if you want. Speeds can be faster than F2D models with off-the-shelf parts, which is nice. I mean, like I said, an $18 motor can give you 22.4 seconds. The running time is probably the biggest area we need to improve. We can get maybe a minute and a half if we're lucky right now. Weight also, it's not so bad, but we need to bring it down a bit more. And I mean, one last thing, aside from competition, I think that these electro models could be simply a valuable resource for training. They give us a lot more opportunities to practice in places like this, and for teaching new people how to fly, getting people interested. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Maybe I'll just leave it with this picture. Yeah. Questions or discussion? Thanks.